My name is Eleanor Ruth Calloway, and for most of my life, everyone believed I was poor. Not struggling loudly, not begging, not desperate, just quietly poor, the kind of poor people stop asking about because they assume nothing ever changes. I never corrected them. I never hinted otherwise. I let the assumption settle into every relationship I had because once it did, people showed me who they truly were. I lived in the same small house for more than 4 decades. The paint peeled slowly, like it had grown tired of pretending. The floors creaked in familiar places, and the windows rattled when the wind came through just right. I drove an old sedan that neighbors recognized by sound before sight. It coughed when it started and sighed when it stopped, and people smiled at it the way they smile at something harmless and outdated. My clothes were plain. My shoes were repaired instead of replaced. I learned how to make myself look invisible without ever disappearing. My children believed the story more than anyone else. To them, I was a widow living on Social Security and a small survivor's pension, careful with money, cautious with plans, grateful for help. They believed I counted grocery prices and worried about heating bills. They believed invitations needed to be gentle and expectations low. They believed my life had narrowed, that my world had become small. And I let them believe it. My husband, Walter, had been gone for 13 years when everything finally came to light. By then, silence felt natural. Walter and I had lived modestly our entire marriage. We never talked about money outside our home. We never displayed success. Walter believed privacy was protection. He believed that once people knew what you had, they stopped seeing who you were. He invested quietly while others chased noise. He trusted patience, time, and restraint. By the time he fell ill, those quiet decisions had turned into wealth far beyond what anyone around us imagined. In the hospital, near the end, when his voice was weak but his eyes were steady, Walter asked me for one promise. He told me not to tell the children about the money. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, out of curiosity and clarity. He wanted to know who would stay when there was nothing to inherit. He wanted to know who loved without calculation. I promised him, not fully understanding how heavy that promise would become. When he died, people rewrote my future in their minds immediately. They saw a woman in her late 60s standing alone beside a coffin and assumed struggle. They assumed loneliness. They assumed fear. Friends hugged me tightly and told me how strong I was. Neighbors spoke in softer voices, as if I might break. My children looked at me with concern mixed with quiet planning, already imagining what support I might need. No one asked what Walter had left behind. They didn't need to. They thought they already knew. I went back to the same routines. I didn't change my car or my clothes. I didn't renovate the house. I transferred assets into trusts managed quietly by people who never spoke my name outside closed rooms. On paper, I looked exactly like what everyone assumed I was, an aging widow living simply, carefully, predictably. At first, my children were attentive. They called often. They asked if I was eating well, if I was lonely, if I needed help with repairs or bills. Their voices carried concern and responsibility. I thanked them and told them I was fine. And I was. Not just financially, but emotionally. I was watching. I was learning. As time passed, concern faded into routine. Calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. I stopped being a priority and slowly became an obligation. They didn't stop loving me, but their love became scheduled, managed, and limited by convenience. I noticed how easily I was excluded from plans that cost money. Vacations happened without invitations. Restaurants were suddenly not really my scene. Trips were planned with explanations already prepared for my absence. They weren't cruel. That was what made it hurt. They were practical, reasonable, kind in a distant way. I overheard conversations they didn't know I heard. Discussions about what they would do if I ever needed expensive care. Suggestions that I shouldn't bother with gifts because they knew money was tight for me. Family events I wasn't invited to because they assumed I wouldn't want to travel. Each moment was small. Together, they formed a truth. I realized how easily one sentence could change everything. I have money. If I said it, the tone would shift instantly. Invitations would return. Opinions would matter. Time would be made. I would be valued differently. And that understanding made me stay silent even longer, because I didn't want to be valued for what I had. I wanted to know who valued me without it. As I aged, the world treated me accordingly. Older women already fade. Poor older women fade faster. Clerks rushed me. Doctors spoke over me. People explained things slowly, loudly, kindly, as if age had erased my intelligence. I smiled and let them. There is a strange freedom in being underestimated. You see more. You hear more. You learn who performs kindness and who lives it. Behind that quiet exterior, my life was full. I traveled anonymously, booking trips under different names. I stayed in beautiful places without ever being recognized. I donated quietly to causes I believed in. I paid medical bills for strangers who would never know my face. I funded scholarships, shelters, libraries, and community programs without plaques or acknowledgments. Generosity feels different when it is unseen. It feels lighter, pure, almost sacred. I also learned about loneliness. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind that settles in when you realize no one is intentionally unkind, and no one is intentionally present either. I was always fine, always stable, always there. And so, I became easy to postpone. When my health began to decline, it surprised them. Aging had happened gradually to me, but suddenly to them. I had already prepared. Every account was organized. Every asset documented. Every instruction written carefully. The money had already moved quietly out of my hands and into the world, where it could do good without my name attached. I wrote one letter. I wrote it slowly, without anger. I didn't accuse. I didn't shame. I explained the promise I had made. I explained what I had observed. I explained why most of the money was gone. Not to punish. Not to teach a lesson. But to be honest. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't want apologies shaped by shock. I wanted truth to arrive when it could no longer be negotiated. I died quietly in my sleep on a Tuesday morning. The funeral was modest, just as I had lived. My children sat together, composed, respectful, already thinking about responsibilities and logistics. They believed this was simply the end of a simple life. When the attorney stood and unfolded my letter, the room changed. Silence thickened with each sentence. I explained that I had been wealthy for decades, that I had chosen silence, that I had watched how the absence of money altered behavior. I told them the test had never been about wealth. It had been about presence. When the value of what once existed was spoken aloud, shock replaced certainty. Memories rewrote themselves in real time. They learned the money was gone, given away thoughtfully, deliberately, completely. They received small envelopes, not as rewards or punishments, but as mirrors. Enough to remind them that money had never been the point. I wasn't there to see what followed. I didn't hear the arguments, the regret, the justifications, or the apologies. But I hoped that later, quietly, when they were alone, something settled into clarity. I hoped they remembered the calls they didn't return, the invitations they didn't extend, the moments they assumed would always be there. One day, they will be old too. And when that day comes, I hope the people around them choose kindness without calculating value. That was the only inheritance I ever wanted to leave behind.